Brianna.
Hi.
Hey. It's like these podcasts, whenever we do them, we sit down and talk and eat and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to say, hey, how you been? Because we've already went through all that. But I do try not to talk too much, ask too many questions because, of course, it is. But it's been a little bit since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
So, okay. So really just going over kind of this podcast thing that I'm doing. I wanted to do it because I've done so many different things in my life, from restaurants to fighting to poker. And I've had several of those people on already. And I know that being involved in so many different things, that there's a lot of things that are involved in those either occupations or hobbies that nobody else ever even realizes. And it really is interesting when you're not in something like that to actually go, really, that's what they do, So, and yeah, I've been out doing work in different areas and seen people, and I'm like, they're in their own little world, and their world is so completely different from what I'm doing right now. So I thought it would be fun, interesting, also give me an opportunity to reach out and talk to people that, for me to kind of learn myself, and then also reconnect with friends and just and get their stories out. So from the beginning, when I started thinking about doing this, which was over a year ago, and we've got a few episodes out, I thought of you. And the reason I did, I don't know a lot about what you do or have done or currently doing, but I do know that some of what you've done, and it's to me is a very important topic. I think I want to keep it light and fun. I want to kind of joke around like we normally do, but I think the things that you're involved with need to be talked about. And got some personal, reasons why I want to do this. So, first of all, what are you into right now?
Well, currently I'm a mental health therapist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you specialize in like one group of it or just anybody?
I see clients ranging from 4 years old to 65 and up. So I literally can see anybody, children, teens, or adult.
Okay. And is it like a private practice, or you're doing it you have like partners, or you do this just on your own?
I'm with a private practice. I'm currently under supervision, and I'm working right now.
Okay. So are you getting like people in there that have been went and been diagnosed and said, okay, well, we need you to go talk to this person? Or is it primarily just people reaching out, or a combination?
It can be a combination. They can come to me and they could already be diagnosed with something and wanting further services. Maybe their therapist is no longer working, or maybe they've moved locations and they're seeking a new therapist. A lot of times people come to me and I'm the one that has to assess them and diagnose them. And sometimes I refer them out to other psychiatrists for other things as well.
So as you're a counselor, correct? I'm not, yeah.
Call myself a therapist, but yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the lingo down,
Yeah.
so I don't. So I guess what I wanted to kind of touch on, I had watched a podcast a couple of days ago, and on that podcast, it was actually a debate, and they were talking about. Actually, this particular one was talking about young boys growing up, and they're seeing a swing. For years, you had a disproportionate in female to male and how much they can make. And that was something that was a lot of attention was applied to, and now you're starting to see it swing the other direction. Not that it wasn't a good thing. I mean, we all, of course, we want to be fair to everyone, but they're showing some startling things about young men going into the world, and based on a lot of different things. They talked about low testosterone levels in young boys, men coming in compared to their other generations, and they're talking a lot about single family member, so, and I knew you had dealt with some, what is it? I'm drawing a blank here. When you are a foster parent, there it is. There, yeah, you've done some foster parenting, and you've been in that a lot, and that's something I wanted to talk about too, is the foster parenting. So, if I'm not mistaken, you had several. Yeah. So, how has that been, and what's the? I know there's some awesome benefits because you get to be in part of someone's life forever. It's you're going to always be there, whether actually, together as a family, but they'll grow up and talk about, the experiences they had with you for the rest of their life. So what are some of the struggles though doing with people could look for when they're going into something like that?
Um, that's actually a really good question. I think for us specifically, me and my husband and my son, because at the time, he was around 10 years old, is it a good fit for him as well? Like to think about the impact that fostering is going to have on him. He was the only child. So is he comfortable sharing his space and sharing his parents? So thinking about the long term impact that that could have on him. Also, other struggles include, you're having caseworkers and social workers constantly at your door. There's an increase of appointments and balance between schedules, balance between trying to take care of yourself, but also nurturing another child and helping them go through their trauma and the things that they're going through. But then on top of that, you're also trying to save space for the biological parents because the goal is to return them back to their biological parent if they can. And so, still trying to balance being supportive of the bio family, but also trying to be what the kid needs in that moment, whether that is going back home or staying with you. So
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some stats on that, and I'd like to talk about that some more later about how likely it is for a foster child to go back to their biological parents. In my generation, which I'm a couple generations before you, um, you didn't see. I mean, of course, you've seen foster parenting, but it was not. I don't think it was as involved with like people oversight. There was a lot less of that, and families in general. I think there should have been multiple times someone should have stepped in and made some changes for children. I guess a personal note. Of course, I don't want no one telling me how to raise my child, but at the same time, there's some rescue opportunities there. These poor kids, going through some hard times, and it's not necessarily, in my opinion, the parents necessarily are just bad people or mean people, and they themselves are dealing with some mental health issues, some addiction issues, and it's hard to take care of yourself when you're trying to take care of a child as well. I would assume so. How many times did you have children in? Do you remember?
we've had approximately 12 children in our home, and then five of those 12 we've adopted or kept long term.
Yeah. So you said something about making sure that your son was okay with that, and I think that's important too because I can remember when I was looking, when I my first relationship was over and I was going into another relationship, which is how I met you through her. I wanted to make sure that that was something that was going to work for my children, and that she was aware of that going in. That this, and they need to have the comfort to be able to talk about their other mother and stuff. So did you have any challenges with that, or has that been like smooth sailing with the bringing so many different kids in?
One thing that we did that worked really well for our family was we didn't take any children that was older than our bio child. So Elvira was about 10 at the time. We have never had any children that was older than him, specifically just because we didn't want him to feel like he had to, anybody was coming in, bossing him around or trying to compete or anything like that. It just worked for us and our family. But outside of that, he was very supportive, and he wanted other siblings. I never wanted to give birth after him, and so he was very supportive and very excited about us fostering in that journey. So he was very much a part of that journey as much as we were.
And see, there's one of those things I would say no one would ever consider. I never even thought about that. If you're going to have them come in, try to have them younger, because I could see that, and also it probably brought out that kind of parenting from him almost, where he wanted a nurturing kind of, like someone younger. So yeah, that's a great point. And so now you had him really young. I know that was something that you had to do there too, and I commend you on that. There's a lot of people who would have. I know your situation there. So, and then as far as your other family, have you had a lot of support from them, like your family?
Um, I don't really have a relationship with my biological family very much. We can go into that
Yeah,
later
I
if you
was
want
going to
to.
talk a little bit about that.
But my foster family has been very supportive, very, they call my foster mom Nana. She checks in, she's there, sends birthday cards and that kind of thing. So very much supportive. As far as Justin's family, that's my husband. They're also very hands on and very supportive as well. So
Yeah, that's good.
we've had a lot of support, and even our friends are very supportive too. And I think the other part is some of our other friends were also fostering, so we could kind of lean on each other and have that network of support. So that's another aspect of it as well.
So, do you think now, when you say your foster parents, were they foster or did they actually adopt you at any point?
So they actually wanted to adopt me, and actually went through the legal channels to adopt me, and then a judge denied their request for that adoption. So, with that, they did get permanency of me. So I did stay and continue living with them until I aged out at 18.
So, yeah, the aging out, that's something I really want to come back to. So, if you would help me remember that, because I had some questions about that. So, do you think that coming in out of a foster parent situation, that was something that motivated you to want to do it
Oh,
now? Of course, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It was very much a drive. So, like I said earlier, I never really wanted to give birth again. If my husband wanted to at the time, I was like, I'll be open to considering it. But if he's okay with just adopting, that was where my heart was at. And so part of that heart to adopt was because I grew up in the foster care system, and I know what it feels like to be separated from your family, and I know what it's like to feel disconnected in an environment that you weren't raised in, cultural differences, economic differences, and you bring all those factors into it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it motivated me to want to foster. The big thing that I always had as a hesitation, I would say, is my age. I think around the time when we started fostering, I was 25. I was still
Yeah.
really young. And so I was like, oh, I'll do it when I'm 30 or,
Yeah.
maybe at 35. And then, one of my friends was fostering, and there was a need. There was such a need. They didn't have enough
Oh,
homes.
so we were talking about how you kind of was influenced from your you being in a foster situation as a child. So if you want, let's get into that a little bit. Now, your biological mother still had some, if I remember right, had some contact and stuff with you. Was that an issue with your
Uh,
other parents?
so the relationship with my biological mom was always complicated. When I was 1 years old, I was sent to go live with my aunt. So my aunt raised me from one until I was around 12. And throughout that time, those 12 years, I rarely ever saw my mom. She was in and out of prison, struggling with addiction. I would get letters from jail, but she never tucked me in bed at night. I never remember a home cooked meal, never, took me school shopping. So our relationship was,
Yeah,
you
very
know,
limited.
it was
Yeah,
limited. That's a good
yeah,
way to put it.
yeah. I had a similar situation. My mom had problems with addictions, and that's why I said this was a really important podcast to me, because at some point when my life starts to slow down, and here
Hmm.
I should take some advice from you. And you're like, I'm 25, but eventually you have to just do it. I always
Hmm.
wanted to be more influence of children. I did teach martial arts for years and
Hmm.
such kids, so I for years, long
Hmm.
time. So I do believe that influence has been good, but. So yeah, and then when I moved in with my family, my dad's family, we lived with them. I was not anything like them, and so it was almost like being.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to compare it, by any means, but yeah, I did get that kind of, not being a part of the family kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
And I'll piggyback off of that just for a second. Part of that is it's so deep and complex, because like I said, I wasn't really raised by mom, didn't really know mom, letters here, randomly visit here when she's out of prison, may see her for a couple hours, may not see her again for a couple years. Bio dad, never knew who he was. For all I knew, he had died, or mom didn't know who he was. It was just unspoken. So, when you're a kid, no one explains to you what happens. You just make up things in your head and you
yeah,
assume. And so that had always kind of been my relationship in my head with my biological dad. But I have a twin brother. And so growing up, I had never been separated from my twin brother. When my mom couldn't raise us at one and went to live with my aunt, I was with attached to the hip with my twin brother. And so I will bring this back to foster care. When I got put in foster care, I was separated from my twin brother. And I will say that that was one of the hardest parts about going into the foster care system. That even today at 31, I feel like still has a major impact on the way I view the world in that separation.
Yeah, that I could, I watched a movie recently with my youngest son. He's really into chess. I'm trying to think of the name of it, Queen's Gambit. And in that movie, they deal with that. They're in a foster situation, and one gets to go, the other doesn't. And I could see that being a really struggle because not only are you do have that bond with them, and you've already trying to figure out the bond with your other family. So I can imagine. So I would imagine those experiences, especially the one where you said where a lot of the adults didn't explain it to you very well, and they just assumed, and then you just had to make up things in your mind to deal with it. I would assume that helps you with your current children, right?
Yeah, I definitely try to have hard conversations with my teenagers. We would have like once a week for 30 minutes. They could bring up any topic that they wanted, and we would talk about it, whether it would be learning about puberty, learning about dating, finances. Like they got to bring the topic, so they were more eager to talk about it. Every now and then I would bring up a topic and we would have hard conversations, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I wanted to do that for them and with them because I didn't have that growing up.
So let's recap. Do you remember exactly where we were, or not exactly, but kinda? I know you were talking about your experience with being in foster care and how it helped with your children, and we talked about your son and him being making you wanted him to be, of course, them to be younger, so he would work with that well. Um, and then we were talking about the requirements. Can you go over that one more time with me just to make sure we didn't miss it?
Oh, yeah. So some of the requirements to being a foster parent, you have to pass a background check. You have to go through so many hours of foster parent training. Some of the topics they like is trauma, that kind of stuff, what to expect, how to make them help them acclimate into the home or make them feel supported and loved, those kind of things. Trying to think.
Let me jump in there. So I don't know if we got it, but when things went out, but you were said that there's you can do private fostering. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. And when you get into that, is that overseen by any type of government association, or how's that work?
It's complex. So there's private and there's state foster care agencies. The expectations are a little bit different for each. The major difference that I like to explain to people is most of the time private foster care agencies are taking more of higher level kids. So what I mean by that is when kids are placed in the foster care system, they're placed on a level. So level is the severity of care. So if you have a large sibling group, then they might be a higher level. It's harder to find a home that is able to take them just because the state's goal is to keep them together. So sometimes if the state homes, there's not enough state homes for that, then they will outsource. I don't like to say outsource, but they'll send the kids to a private foster care agency that maybe has more resources or more bedding or, more homes available for that. Other things that are included into that is behavior. That's a big factor in the level of care. And if a kid is constantly running away, which they call AWOL, or a kid is maybe they're sexually abusive, and they can't be in a home with other kids, or you get a kid that's on drugs, or they're just not doing well, they tend to have a higher level of care. Higher level of care tends to go to a private agency because those homes require more training, and they're that's just what they do. They send them to those.
So I wasn't aware of that. I didn't even. But there's still, I'm sure, some kind of oversight, right?
Yeah, so they do still report to the cabinet. They try to place the kids within the cabinet first. If they can't place them within the cabinet, then they will send them to private agencies who tend to take the higher level of kids. Like I said, the ones that the state can't place, they usually place in the private agencies.
So from your experience, and you may not, I'm sure you may not have the stats on this or anything, but I would assume that foster parents who were either fostered or came out of a situation that wasn't ideal probably are better at this than people who never experienced things like that. I could be the opposite though. I don't know. What is your experience with that?
I say every case is different. And one of the things I'll say is that being, even for myself, being in foster care now, I've got a master's in social work. I've been a foster parent. I've worked in the foster care world for years. Um, Even with all of my knowledge and all of the years of life experience, nothing would have ever still prepared me other than living it
Yeah.
for the journey that fostering is. So I feel like it's one of those things that if you haven't dealt with some of your own childhood traumas, if you haven't worked through some of your own things, just because you were in foster care before doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be a good foster parent. Um, and then there's some people that work through the things they need to, and they're phenomenal foster parents. So I really just think it comes down to the individual and how much work they put into making sure that they're mentally where they need to be when they take in these foster kids.
Right. So I did a little research, and I probably did more research on this episode than any other because it's really something I'm interested in. I seen that there's now this is of course just random stats, but there's generally around 400,000 children in the United States that are in that foster system, not necessarily been placed yet. And then I'm seeing that about 100,000 of them get adopted. And that's generally by the foster parent, and is what I've seen. Is that what you're seeing too?
Um, Generally, so there's a few different things that tends to happen. The kid can either go back to bio family or bio parent, or they will go live with what we call kinship care. They'll go live with a grandparent, aunt, uncle, that type of thing. Um, and then outside of that, if any of the family is not able to get the kid back, then they will go into the foster home. They have to be in the foster home for at least 6 months before they're even able to be considered for adoption. And what I mean by that, that doesn't mean, oh, they're in that foster home for 6 months and now they're up for adoption. If they're already like reached adoption status, is what I mean. So that means the parents haven't worked their case plan. The case has probably been open for a few years at this point. The DCBS has done everything that they can to reunite the kid and say they go into a different foster home, because the reality is a lot of these foster kids, they don't just stay in one foster home.
Yeah.
I was blessed enough to go in one foster home, and that was my foster home from the time I was 12 to 18. But the reality is, a lot of these kids, they're going to go through one, two, three. Sometimes I've known kids that have been in 20 plus homes. It's sad to say, but could you imagine going to
No, I
20
can't
different
imagine.
homes? So by the time they get to that 20th home, it's like the kid may be ready to be adopted, or they're resistant. They don't want to be adopted. And you have that as well.
I can't imagine being 20 plus homes, but the last time I moved, I kind of briefly, because my background, my mother was extremely, she was something. But I can remember just going back through the just kind of checklist of how many times I moved. When I moved in the home I live now, it was over 40 some times I had moved in my life. And I know there was struggles for me with moving from school to school to school. And when I was with my mom, it was generally, I can remember one time it was like I'd missed 90 days of school just because she wouldn't send me. Have you experienced anything like any kind of issues with school?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, there's some kids that I know, like I said, who've been in so many homes, they don't even remember how many homes. They can't even tell you the names of half of their foster parents and the people that they've lived with. When it comes to education, a lot of them are really behind because they have moved. In one school year, they may have been to 5 different schools for all kinds of reasons, and then they feel defeated, so they stop trying.
Yeah, that's really hard. I can remember that being really tough. Do they get a lot of issues from like their classmates giving them? I know that when you were being growing up, you were really good friends with my wife, and you come from a small community here where we live, and I feel like from just what I've heard, you say and heard that you were just like, there was no issue. Had a group of friends, and things went well. Do you think that happens often, or do they get backlash from their classmates?
A lot of kids do get backlash. I felt like I remember the time where I started going to Ballard County, and I was in the middle school, and I was scared. I was scared to open up and tell them, like, hey, I have a kid. Hey, I'm in foster care. And another kid encouraged me, was like, oh, everybody's going to be supportive. You should tell them. And I did. And it was like, a breath of fresh air to finally get that weight off and just get to be my authentic self. And okay, I'm in foster care. I said it, you know. But there are some kids that I know that was in foster care and didn't have that same experience, that maybe went to other schools, or, you know, they just got bullied because of it. You know, when a kid gets mad, what's the first thing they say? They're going to say something to hurt you, right? So a lot of times, what is their go to? Well, that's why you don't have a mom and dad, or, you know, that's why you're in foster care. So I feel blessed that I was surrounded by people that were really supportive of my foster care journey, but not every kid gets that. And that's a sad reality.
Yeah, I often see, of course, I have children going through school and high school and had lots to deal with there. But generally, I see during that junior and senior year, pretty much everyone kind of comes together. But before then, it is hard. It is hard, and I know that kids are dealing with a lot of different challenges now, and I know that they get. I think the new generation, the older generations are way too critical on the new generations. They'll as far as the X generation, they're always talking about, Gen Z, Gen X, and on about they don't want to work, they're lazy, this and that, but they're not looking at the challenges that that they're facing. It's really easy to, when you not when you're not aware. I mean, a lot of the guys that I deal with, that I will talk like that. They have no idea. Well, they're always on their phone. Okay. So in modern world, if you have an occupation, generally it's going to be you can't have nearly anything without a phone nowadays. And they are taught this in school. I mean, they have to have, emails their tablets that they work on, so it's only going to continue. That would be like telling someone from the 30s, you're always screwing around with that shovel, That's what they had. That was the tool that they had to have. So, you got to, I understand we need to put limits on things, but when 90% of your jobs are going to be in that, we have to kind of look. And that's just one example that I've seen being too hard on them, and in the struggles that they deal with. Social media is one of them. I know that's a big one too, and that's something that no one in my generation has any right to talk about. Being judged, being put to a different standard, and then seeing, I've seen many articles about everything you see on social media is how great it is, how beautiful they are, and how awesome their job is, and their mate, the people that their boyfriend and girlfriend is just the most, and that's a hard standard for children. Do you deal with things like that with yours, or have you seen that being an issue? How that plays a factor in how they're developing?
How
How social media and the digital world, and also being judged by the previous. I guess I've really asked the younger generations. How do you? I mean, after a while, that would get old. Do you see any of that? And
I guess when it comes to foster care, I think the biggest thing that I see with social media is there's a discrepancy between are they allowed to have it or not allowed to have it. And I'll say the reason why is because a lot of social workers don't want their foster child to have social media, because then if you're a teenager and somebody's telling you you can't talk to your biological mother, what are you going to do? You're going to do it anyway. You're going to be secretive. But there's many reasons on why some of these kids can't see their parents, right? Anything from substances to physical to sexual abuse, right? And so, but this random social worker that you just met is trying to tell you you can't talk to your mom. And in kids' mind, they don't really care what their parents did. Most of these kids, their parents could literally do anything in this world, but that's still their mom. That's still their dad. They still love them at the end of the day. And so social workers try to tell these kids they can't have social media because they try to make sure that they're not getting access to talk to their parent. Why? I think it comes from a place of trying to do the right thing by the kid, but it also kind of backfires in the same breath. And what I mean by that is you're trying to protect the child, but they don't want that type of protection because they want to talk to their parents. So what do? They start acting out. They're lashing out in the foster home. They're yelling at people. They're being disrespectful. They're running away because you're taking away something from them that's important to them, their parents. What's the root of that? Social media, because you're not allowing them to have the social media, which gives them access to talk to their parent, or you're not allowing them to have cell phone access. And so that's really the biggest thing that I see with social media is just all these other teenagers are 15, 16, 17. They're able to have social media, but you're trying to tell this foster kid who you claim you want to have a normal life we want you to be as normal as possible while you're in this foster home. We're trying to help you acclimate, but then they don't get to do what all these other kids are doing.
Yeah, and I can imagine they're probably getting some kickback from their friends too. It's like, everyone's on Snapchat. Well, I can't.
Oh yeah.
I can message. You can't. Yeah, that would be really hard. I guess that would be a really tough one to navigate because they need that, interaction with their peers. How? How are they going to do that?
The other thing is these kids are moving from place to place to place. So when you don't allow them to have social media or you don't allow them to have a cell phone, they're losing another form of connection and attachment, right? So that makes them resent you even more as the adult. And then you also think about it. Sometimes it's not even just the social worker that's saying they can't have it. Every foster home is different, right? So if I've been in 5 foster homes and 3 of them said I could have a cell phone, but 2 of them say I can't, guess what? I don't like those 2 foster parents. So it's like,
I can see it being like a parent that's divorced. It's like mom lets them, or mom is real strict and hard, and dad lets them do whatever they want. Well, who do they want to be with? So yeah, that's a tough spot right there. And then I think when you were saying too, if they move from one to another, not only are they now they not have their parents from the original, then they've lost this person, that they were with in the foster situation, but any friend that they made, they've lost connection with them as well. So if they're not allowed to, yeah, that's a tough spot. I bet that's a really hard one to negotiate there.
For me personally, I remember that was one of the things that I think I struggled with the most was I went to Lone Oak Middle School. And then right before I got put in foster care, I was homeschooled briefly. And then I got sent to Ballard. I never got to say bye to any of my friends at Lone Oak. And so one of the things that I had always struggled with was just acclimating. Like the schools are maybe 30 minutes apart, 40 minutes at most. I don't know exactly. But it was just that change, that switch, having to make new friends, not being able to say bye, and kind of it was grief. I was grieving my old life, and it's not something that people often really think about.
Yeah, when I was thinking on the social media side, I didn't even take some of those things in consideration. Because it is such a and after COVID, there's such a loss of connection between people, and that's how everyone started. That's when podcasting really kind of kicked off, and a lot of the other social things. And I think we've seen some benefit from it, but it's also we're starting. You see a lot of awkwardness in the generations that are, where the teenage. I guess that would be Gen Z group that were really kind of in their high school era during COVID, and that was a huge. I think that took a huge toll on that group of kids. I think you were seeing any issues with how they, graduations. And sporting events. Yeah, it took a lot away from those kids. Do you see any of that? This was a topic I didn't even think about, but are you seeing anything from that generation, that group of kids that were right dead middle of COVID and shutting down the whole world around them? That had to be hard.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Actually, I can't really speak for that generation specifically. I mean, my child is a Gen Z, and I do know he was, they were directly impacted by it, just the lack of social interaction and, lack of routine for real. But when it comes to the foster care world, I know that it was directly impacted by COVID. And part of that was because of schools, right? Most of the kids that go into the foster care system, how do we find out that they're in an abusive or unhealthy environment? We find out through schools, right? When they go to school and they see a friend or they see a teacher and they notice that they're getting hurt, or they go tell us the guidance counselor, or they go tell a friend, right? When COVID happened and the world kind of shut down and everybody stayed in their houses, there was no one really making reports. People weren't going to therapy. People weren't really going, some doctor's offices closed down. So kids who were in unhealthy environments were kind of stuck in those unhealthy environments. And then when everything kind of opened back up and kids started to go back to school, then we started to see an uptick and an increase in kids going back into foster care. And so I know that was directly impacted through COVID.
Yeah. So I think a lot of things changed during COVID. And one thing that I've noticed, my wife is a streamer. She streams and does video games. And when she started doing this, and I try to explain this to people I know, and they just kind of tilt their head, like, what do you mean? She makes money doing that? I'm like, yeah. Does she take her clothes off? No, not that I'm aware of. But I do know that when I tried to kind of, and I'm that guy. A lot of guys are this way. You walk in a room, you're starting to go, boy, I bet their power bill's really high around here. You're just always trying to think about stuff. So I'm looking at what she's doing, and I'm like, um, she's really good at the game, but she's not going to be, there's multiple people that are top level. And then I started realizing, oh, this is nothing about the game really at all. This is more about that chat going on over there. That is the new nightclub. That is the new hotspot. People are going there, making connections, having friends. And then once they've made that connection with this group, that's where they go. That's where they go on. That's their Thursday night kind of hangout. I've seen that a lot. And then, of course, just it has to be entertaining as well. Um, on that, I have noticed though that I'm a big movie buff. I love movies. I'll sit down and watch them. And luckily, my daughter, she's a big movie buff, and my youngest son, he's coming on board. And my oldest son, we talk about him too. But I've noticed that not just kids, but lots of people are losing their attention spans because of those short form entertainment. It's just one after another. And I'm not talking. I got to be careful here because I'm talking about my wife, but she's because of what she does. She's just on a research. She'll still watch a movie with me, but she has to have her phone. you know. Um, do you see that attention span in children that move through and I'm especially if they lose that? Oh my God, that would be really hard to deal with.
Oh, absolutely. I can relate that to my own personal life. We have 6 kids, youngest 5, oldest 19, and absolutely their attention span is very short. Um, I know for the longest, my youngest daughter couldn't even sit through a 30-minute TV show, like a short film. Like she just couldn't. She starts something, she's off to the next thing. Same thing in our foster care world. Kids in general, like in today's society, if you don't like something, what do? You just move on to the next thing. If you're watching a TikTok, what do? Just move on to the next one. You just keep scrolling, and that's the new norm.
I hate to beat a dead horse, but it's really got me curious now because so if they are not allowed social media, do they have any kind of connection? How do they get their entertainment? It would be like I remember when I moved in with my grandmother. She was a very old farm, and I can remember going outside and we had nothing to do. And it was and we were out in the middle of nowhere, so I had no friends. I would take different color leaves and stuff them in this big leaf and throw it up like it was fire. I was going insane, almost cabin fever. How do you deal with that?
Like I said, some foster parents they'll allow the kids to have them on for like an hour, which really isn't that much when you think about it.
No.
You can watch a movie in an hour. You may be able to catch up with your friend. Some of them aren't allowed to have it at all. I mean, they can watch movies, they can read books, they can, I think the biggest thing with the social media though is that connection.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
how we connect in
Sure.
this world. So when you're saying a foster kid or a kid in general can't have that, they need to know a time frame. I think that's the big key. With a lot of the foster kids, we don't give them time frames. We're actually scared to give them a time frame because if it doesn't go through, if they aren't able to go home or they don't get moved to the next home or, if something, if a court date gets moved that they're anticipating. So a lot of times we don't want to get their hopes up, so we don't tell them. But that also applies to phones and social media, right? If you say you can't have this phone or you can't have social media access, how long? Because that's what they need to know. If you're saying you can't have it until you're 16, okay. If you're saying you can't have it till you come in this home and show me that you can follow rules and expectations, because that's a lot of rules foster parents have. You have to earn your phone, right? Which also that leads to another issue, right? Why do I have to come in here and prove that I'm worthy enough to have a cell phone when your kid has a cell phone,
Oof, that's a tough one.
right?
Yeah.
A lot of there's a and I think that's one of the biggest things with all of it is just they need to know. And in a world where I brought up earlier, a lot of times foster kids are left to assume because no one actually will just give us an answer. They won't because I don't want to say they're scared to, but kind of like, yeah, they're scared to. They don't want to get our hopes up. They don't want us to, if you don't give us an answer when we assume, we can also get in trouble. What happens when kids are bored? They get in trouble. They're off doing something, you know, and it's like, do you give them social media to keep them occupied, or do you?
Yeah, so I could see that being, we have several dogs, and my wife is constantly trying to keep them, either from getting away or getting out of all these things. And I told her, I said, it's like being in jail. My job is to feed the dog, water the dog, pet the dog, go to work, blah blah blah. That dog's job, 24/7, is to get free. That's his job. He's sitting there figuring it out. That's all he wants, because he knows that in those woods over there is something he can chase. So his whole day is spent with that. And then I would say the same thing when you got a child sitting there who has an attention span that's been reduced, trying to tell them, oh, how about read a book sometime, or watch a movie. Yeah, their job is going to start being, how do I sneak around and get what I need?
And
Yeah.
they get burner phones. They find ways around
Oh,
it. Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking on that. I lost my train of thought there, but oh man, it was a good one too. I don't want to go back to it, but maybe it'll come back around. So anyhow, uh, you're seeing a lot of those children. What is it when they go to like they turn 18, right? What is that called?
Okay, so when they turn 18, they get to go into independent living if they want to.
Okay. I'm really curious about this because, I've had friends before that were incarcerated, come out, they're felons. And it's like, how do you expect someone, you know, to move forward now? Because you're just dumping them out on the road. They've been in maybe for 10 years or something, and they have no job, they have no experience. They're not going to get a job easily. How do they do that? And I see that, what happens? So a kid turns 18, do they have any kind of program to kind of ease them into the society, or how's that work?
Yeah, so that's pretty much what independent living is. So there's a few things that go into it. If you're adopted out of the foster care system, you don't qualify for independent living. However, the state still pays for your tuition, and the state also will continue to pay for your health insurance until you're 26. I think that's the new law. But independent living is if you are in foster care at the time when you turn 18, then you can either sign yourself out. At that point, you have a say. You can say, hey, I no longer want to be in the foster care system. I'm ready. I maybe want to go reconnect with my bio family, or maybe I want to just do this on my own and totally disconnect. And you're able to sign yourself out and say, I'm done at 18. Alternative to that is if you need support, or you want support, so you're not just stranded out on the side of the road, they offer you independent living. So independent living is basically where they continue to pay for your tuition if you want to go to college. And they also provide you with housing. It's usually good until you're 21 years old. Part of that is you have to have a part-time job or have to have employment, and you also have to go to school. And a caseworker will come visit you every single month and check in and make sure you're doing that. You show proof of your grades and things like that. But it's supposed to help bridge the gap between 18 and 21 to kind of help get you on your feet so that when you do turn 21, you're able to go out into the community and be a productive member of society.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see a lot of kids take advantage of that? Because at 18, I'd be like, I'm done, I'm out.
Listen, so this is actually one of my favorite topics because it's crazy to see. I'll start with myself. I chose to go into independent living. In my mind, I was like, oh, you're going to pay for my bills and my college. And I was a single
The
mom
smart
too.
thing to do.
And I was like, I need all the support I can get. And I already had a vision for what I wanted to do, as far as college goes. So for me, it was a no brainer. I didn't really even consider anything else. I was going to go into independent living. Um, my sibling, on the other hand, chose to go into independent living reluctantly, liked the idea of them paying for the bills, but didn't really want to still have to check in with a caseworker or social worker, you know, didn't really want to have to go to college, wasn't ready for that yet. And so tried it for a few months, signed himself out, didn't want to do it anymore. But honestly, when it comes to like statistics, most kids don't actually want to continue to go into independent living, or the group that I've talked to. And as an adult now, working with a lot of kids who are either about to age out, a lot of them are hesitant because they want to just get out and connect with their parents, and they don't want to be associated with foster care in any way after they turn 18. And so that's actually kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah. I mean, when I was really thinking about this, that was a big question I had, because I'm like, Man, how do they expect these kids to just jump right into it? But I guess the foster parents are probably trying, especially when they get to that 17-year-old, trying to start preparing them for those things and maybe getting them on board with that. I did see that one that on average, 8 years old is kind of the age for foster parents. I don't know if that's just pulling stuff off of the internet.
Listen, I don't know that stat for sure, but I do know that a lot of foster parents tend to want younger kids, and there's a major need for teenagers, for homes for teenagers. A lot of people don't want to take teenagers for various reasons. Some of those reasons include behaviors. Um, when they're young, they're still moldable, and they're willing to listen a little bit more. They're easier to control. When you have those teenagers who feel like they know everything, it's really hard. So there's a major need for more foster homes for teenagers because a lot of people would rather take the younger kid.
Yeah, and I think if you're a teenager and you've been through maybe one or two or three or more, you're like, oh, this is just another stopping point for me. Another, I could see that getting kind of callous about it. And then you're seeing a huge uptick in like autism. We're taking a little stray here, but I've seen a huge uptick in autism, and I've listened to multiple people talk about that. JFK Jr. was a big, of course, he's a big proponent on that. And then also we're seeing anxieties between children, and I've seen I heard there's a big uptick on that on boys, males, and I also I'm just throwing out a bunch of stuff so you can kind of give me your ideas on it. I also seen that now you're seeing males being more anxiety levels growing much more in single parent homes. So the vaccinations is what people are trying. There's a group out there that would say, this is a direct link, and I've seen some of the studies on it, and there's some of it's pretty compelling. And I do have to say, my generation, maybe we overlooked it a lot, but even then, we still did not see that level that you're seeing now. Do you experience that in foster or even in your practice that you're doing now?
Ooh, that's a lot,
I know
Joe.
it's a big one. That's a lot of questions in one. Sorry.
So I'll tackle the autism thing. As a mental health therapist clinician, I have seen such an increase in autism or autistic clients come in. But I will say the thing is, people are becoming more aware, and I think that's the same thing with anxiety. So I'll kind of bridge the two together. You know, our the older generations, oh, he's a boy, he can't have anxiety, he's just going through, he'll be fine, right? So when you say there's an increase or an uptick in those things, it's like, really, is there really an increase or an uptick, or did we just ignore it in the male population, right? Were they crying out depressed and anxious and struggling with X, Y, and Z, but we just kind of ignored it? So I think that's a big thing to really consider when we look at statistics, because there's really not enough statistics back in the day on that kind of thing. When it comes to autism, I definitely think there's an increase in autism. I'm still doing my own research and trying to figure out and understand why. Is it the food that we're eating? Is it the vaccinations? Is it in our water? Is it, in our ecosystem? There's so many factors that I think could play into that. And so I think everybody's just trying to put it in a box, and I think it's way bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would have to agree with you on that. You said back in the day. Well, I was there. I was in that day. So I was there, and I do know, man, my generation, we were the extras, but we were just, thrown out there, go, and we had no, just take care of ourselves for the most part. But it was still, a very strong drive to, boys don't cry kind of thing. Boys don't suck it up. Be a man. I dealt with that throughout my life, and I still kind of put that on my boys. My boy to a degree. I'll tell this a real quick story, and we may or may not leave it in there, but this is an example of that. I do push my boys to be strong, and even my daughter, I push her to be strong, and I tell them on occasion, never let the mortals see you cry. I said, don't go out, be strong, be powerful, and, hold your ground and be respectful, at the same time. I will snack, jerk a knot in their tail, as they would used to say, if they're disrespectful to somebody. but I will also stand behind them if someone disrespects them, and I expect them to do that. But yeah, the boys don't cry thing, and there was something on there too. And on that note was what was it called? The Superman facade. Are you familiar with that at all?
Not really.
They were just saying that that's a boy thing. That boys will keep things hidden inside, and they're trying to be strong and putting that
Oh,
foot out there.
just had that conversation earlier today.
Great, right? So you've
Yeah.
seen something along that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, I'll take it back. For so long, when guys would cry, stop crying. Why are you crying? If a girl cries, it's okay. Give me a hug. You can cry, let it out, right? So we've set up, you know, this dynamic where guys feel like it's not safe for them to cry. It's not safe for them to be honest or be vulnerable, you know. And I'll say women, even adult women, like we want our man to be emotionally mature, but they've never been taught. They've never been taught, like it's okay to have these feelings and we don't validate them. And so I just think it's really funny because we're finally taking a turn and starting to recognize that and trying to do better. And I have seen so many men come in and when they first sit in that chair, they don't want to talk. They're there. They've made the effort to show up, but they're still not ready to talk. And so I have to work a little bit harder to get them to feel comfortable in therapy, and I have to work a little bit harder to get them to understand that it's okay to cry. But once those tears start, it's like every week after that, they feel comfortable. They can cry. They know that when they're in that safe place, they're allowed to do that. And then they're taking that outside of the session and they're starting to be vulnerable with their families. And now their families are seeing them cry. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing because I think we need more of that.
Yeah, I will. Coming from that generation, I had to actually earn my chops, if you know that phrase.
Don't,
Well,
Joe.
earning your chops is like you don't get to be that person unless you've went through this. So I was a fighter for years. I trained fighters. I'm a poker player. I collected money for poker rooms and other people. And so after the end of it, I said, well, I've earned my chops. I've done enough masculine that so now, yeah, a really good commercial can make me cry. So I can admit that, but yeah, it's a tough spot for kids to be like that, and putting that, keeping those things inside, and then as you get to be an adult, you see, you were talking about that with the men, and a lot of the younger men, from what I've heard, they're struggling because there's such a high level bar for them to stand up to. They're seeing that they have to be sensitive. But to a degree that they get awkward. They're like, I don't even know how to talk to a female. Is what I'm hearing from. They're like, how do you again, how do they approach dating? How do they approach all that stuff in their life when they are told that being a man, and I don't want this to become a man's
Male
story.
empowerment.
Yeah, I don't want
That's
that,
okay.
but at the same time, these guys are the girls are having their own struggles, and we'll get into that. But these guys are being told, you're bad for being man, really. And now when I say that, I'm not just saying masculinity, but they're made to feel like they're creeping on someone when they're just saying hi or maybe asking for a date. Do you see that? Is that getting to be an issue for boys? And then
I can't say that, Joe, but what I will say, I think a lot of that comes down to the breakdown in communication, right? Well, and I'm going to tie this back to what we talked about earlier, but social media, right? And online gaming, right? Whenever everybody's online interacting, they don't have to interact in person, you lose touch. So the way you communicate online is not the same way you communicate face to face. And so I think that plays a real big role in people's ability to be vulnerable with each other in person and, connect in person. I love the internet. I do. I love, waking up sometimes and I'm just mindlessly scrolling before I even step foot out of the bed. But the reality is that a lot of it comes down to just that simple connection. Like we've lost that a little bit. And I think that's tied into sometimes the guys struggle because this is not a statistic, I'll say. I think this is more of my perception. In my perception, men tend to game a lot more than females too. And so I think they're going to lose a little bit more touch of that connection and that social communication.
yeah. Well, going now over to the female side, and this actually affects both. There was a TikTok fad, or I don't know what it was on one of the social media, but they were like, "Would you rather be left in a room with a bear or with a man?" And a lot of the girls were saying, "I'd much rather be left in a room with a bear." That shows that they're feeling how uncomfortable they are around males. But then you got to take that same thing, and the men are like, wow, they're like, wow. So then they're trying to be more. It would be very hard and draining to try to stay. You can't be yourself. That's not. I think that would be a problem. So as far as your practice, you feel like you're getting how many people do you see a week on average?
Well, so therapy is a little bit different in the therapeutic world. A full time is about 27 to 30 hours, whereas your average work week for a typical job is 40-hour work week. For me personally, I work 27 hours. That's full time for me. You have to take into consideration that when you're hearing people's problems all day, people are crying, people are telling you their deepest, darkest secrets. I may be sitting across from someone who has murdered someone. I may be sitting across from a rapist. I may be sitting across from somebody that's addicted to drugs. I may be sitting across a abuse victim. Like, all these different things, they still impact me and they still impact any other therapist that's seeing them. And so having that weight on your shoulders and trying to be present for them, and then also being able to switch that off when you go home and still being present for your own family, and listening to them and your own friends and trying to be supportive of them, and then still make time for yourself on top of all of that. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so I forgot what you even
Well,
asked me.
you were talking about something that I was just thinking about going into, how you deal with talking with these people. It's got to be mentally draining, emotionally draining, and you can't help but maybe get connected. And I just recently again heard a podcast where it was an undercover FBI, CI, I can't remember which one he was, a big, huge monster of a guy, and he went undercover to like biker gangs and some white supremacist stuff and some domestic terrorism things, and they would do mental health checkups on him. He had, because he would be dealing, you get connected with these people, and he said, I cared about them even the day they went to prison, and when they got out, I would check on them, and put himself in danger doing that. Yeah. Do you guys, as a therapist, do you have those checkups? Do you have, is it something that's kind of voluntary, or are you required or suggested?
So not listen, even when I was in grad school, the number one thing that they told us was this job is mentally draining. You're taking the weight of everyone else onto your shoulders and you're carrying it and you're holding it. And so it was highly encouraged. If you are a therapist, then you are to seek your own therapist. It's not mandatory. But most therapists in this world will have their own therapists just to piggyback off of. We're not sharing what our clients are saying. We're maintaining their confidentiality. That's crucial. But having somebody that we can go to about our own problems and kind of help us so that we can be 100% present for our clients. And that's really the goal.
Yeah. Really hard to shut off though, right?
For some people, I will say this. There are some days where I've heard some really awful things that's really like tugged at my heartstrings, and there's days I get in the car and I don't even know how I got home. Like, I've been so like zoned out and I've mentally just shut down that I'm like, man, I got home really fast. I don't know how I got there. That doesn't happen often anymore. I think the more I get into it, and more experience I have, it's gotten better. But for the most part, I've gotten really good at being able to shut it off. When I step out of that door at work, I get in my car, I instantly put on happy music, things that bring me joy, things that are going to get me and snap me out of that headspace of work and switch me into, okay, this is my me time. So, the 10 to 15 minutes it takes me to get home, that's my time to kind of decompress, to listen to things that bring me joy and kind of switch gears a little bit.
Yeah. So another topic that I wanted to talk to you about was issues like, again, going back to my generation. You were, no crying, you toughen up, suck it up, walk it off, that kind of thing. I don't remember ever going to any doctors or anything like that. But and also things like ADHD, ADD. Um, Before it's just called hyperactive or he's hyper, and most of our generation would be like, yeah, he just needs to be, beat to some degree, got, he just needs some discipline. And then later in life, you start, as for me, I struggled throughout my life with, and a lot of it I think was I fought cage fights, and here, this is me going back trying to justify these feelings. Like I said, I got my chops. I fought in cage fights, and I'll tell people that, and then because I'm leading up to the story where here I fought big guys, I fought anybody, but I'm saying that to say at the same time I hate confrontation and I hate conflict because that's what I grew up in. I avoid it, and then I become a kind of a people pleaser, and that's really hurt me in later in life.
Me too.
Yeah, it's really hard because I want to tell you what you want to hear, and candor is a problem that I've and shout out to Gary V. If you're out there watching, out of you taking time from your millions of viewers to watch my three, but he talks about candor a lot, and I have issues with that, and it's hurt me in life and business, and recently I've just really got a hold of that. Then also the ADHD. Younger kids, hear Joe Rogan talk about when he was a kid that, they just thought he was a bad kid, but the structure that was put in place. Are you seeing adults come out with that? I mean, I was diagnosed with adult ADHD. And the other day, I know I'm telling stories, but the other day I was talking to the lady I work with, and I said, "You want to see what an ADHD looks like?" And I had 3 sets of earbuds, those cases. Every single one of those 3, no, I mean even 4. Every single one of them was missing the right ear. And I keep buying more because I only put the one in. Yeah, so you see that a lot,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're starting to see that come out. And is that a therapeutic thing that they can do, or is it just medications?
Well, not everybody wants to be medicated, and I think that's the thing that we try to balance a lot because some people just want tricks and tips and things on how to help their ADHD, So we can talk about organization, we can talk about, structure, we can talk about calendars and planners and just different things to kind of help with that ADHD. And some of them, they need medication and we refer them to psychiatrists who helps them get on that. So,
Yeah, you were talking earlier about something as far as I think we were talking about ADHD or something along that line. And here mine is kicking in again, anxiety levels. So you were talking about foster kids and how you need to give them some kind of a timeline or some kind of a goal, maybe. I tend to see that too. Like anxiety levels can be off the chart. You can't. You can't stop. You can't stop thinking about it. And people will give you this really, really good advice of just don't think about it. Oh, and you're like, oh, well,
yeah, if it
that's
was that
solved.
easy, if it was that easy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. And I've dealt with it. And I see it in a lot of younger kids dealing with these anxieties, overwhelming anxiety, not to be, and I would say almost handicap them into moving forward. How do you help people with that issue, struggling to even day to day tasks?
One thing I will say with the anxiety thing is, a lot of it is anxiety, but a lot of times it's also being overstimulated. And that tends to get overlooked so many times. Right. And I guess that also ties into the autism thing that we talked about earlier. But for me, I'm always looking like, do we have anxiety or are we overstimulated and that's kind of triggering our anxiety, right? Because we go back to COVID a little bit, and I guess I'm tying all these things back together in my head. But when COVID, where people were isolated, they were less overstimulated. They weren't in crowds. People were told to keep it 12 and under, 12 people or less, 10 people or less, 5 people or less. Like we were hearing so many different things. So people tend to have at that time had a calmer environment, right? There tended to be less chaos and things going on. So now we're back full force, except for Walmart. They're not open 24 hours anymore. I just have to say that. I had to throw that in there. I feel some type of way. But yeah, no, like for real, when it comes down to it, I think a lot of it's also them being overstimulated a lot. They're in environments where there's a lot of people and a lot of things going on. And then like you said, people, oh, you got anxiety. Like it tends to be minimized. But I lost my train of thought.
Well, my experience is for me is I tend to I will fixate on things, and then I will and then and if until there's a resolution, I will continue to fixate on it, and then I'll add another one, and I'll add another one, and at any given time, I think I feel like I'm mentally working on 10 things. Now,
Problem with foster care though is they don't have that ability, right? They don't get the ability to have resolve or answers. A lot of times they may have a plan or a solution and it falls through. So I had anxiety about not being able to go home. And now I still don't know if I'm going to be able to go home. I had anxiety because I didn't know what this foster home was going to be like. And now I've moved to my third foster home, right? So when it comes to foster care, we're talking a lot about anxiety. How do you stop having anxiety when your environment is never consistent? When you never know what's going to be what, you never know what to expect, and that's the same thing with, adults today.
yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's what kind of spurred that in my thought when you're talking about how they need a timeline, and it's really hard to give it that. For me, if I have a resolution, it doesn't have to mean that I've got the problem solved, but I've figured out a way to solve it.
You're in the right
And then I
direction.
and then I will then I'm done until I have to deal with that. And it's a problem. I can really sympathize with the kids, not know, just the unknown, where's this going? What's next? There's been some cases when kids went into foster care and you're seeing some abuse there. Have you seen that? Ever had to deal with that in that situation?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's an unfortunate
Mm-hmm.
thing,
It
and
is.
yeah, and it is not something I would never hold that against the system, because you got to try, but you're going to have things fall apart there.
Yeah. I think that goes back, I've had so many jobs over the years, and one of my jobs I worked at um, mental health psychiatric hospital. They also had a unit for substance abuse for minors. Um, some of those kids, to this day, I still think about them and broke my heart because their parents were getting them started on drugs, right? Injecting them with all kinds of different drugs, and they're in foster care because of that, or sexual abuse, they're in foster care because of that. And so I've gotten to witness, parents beat their children and having bruises, and anything you can imagine. I've probably seen it at some point.
Yeah, that's devastating. So this is something else I'd like to bring up, and you're talking about sexual abuse. So, as adults who have had that in their youth, in their young, when they were young, do you see that causing issues later in life with their relationships? Yeah, I could. I will speak to this that I could see and maybe experience. You see that as, especially I would say in that situation where you got a child who has been, you know, maybe not getting the attention it needs, and then this is attention, and then all of a sudden, I always call it wiring. The wiring in when you're being young, when you're young and growing up, I feel like your mind is at the point of being wired. There's connections made. So this means this and that means that. So a young person who maybe had experienced that. And then wire that to maybe pure to love, or this is what people who care about me do. You see that in like adults, how that affects their life.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen is that a lot of people who've been through sexual abuse, either they don't tell people for years, and then as adults, they kind of take some of that baggage into their adult relationships. And then they have kids, and they're not necessarily sexually abusing their children, but they're not able to love their kids the way they need to because they haven't resolved their own childhood trauma. And they also struggle with dating because they can't form healthy connections. You have the anxiously attached um, person because of the sexual trauma that they've been through that's been unresolved. So that's the big thing.
Yeah, that's got to be a really hard thing to deconstruct in your mind. and rewire. You know.
And the other thing about that is triggers, right? I feel like I keep saying triggers, but a lot of times you don't know if something's going to impact you until it happens, right? So for me, for the longest time, oh, I'm good. I'm good, right? Walk past somebody in Walmart and smell the cologne that my sexual abuser wore. Wow, didn't know a smell could trigger me so much, right? So to think there's all kinds of triggers and you never know what it's going to be until you're in that situation. And then you're reprocessing and reliving some of those painful moments again. And then you're trying to explain to your new partner or your current friends or your children why you can't get out of bed the next day, right? So it's just a really hard place to be.
Well, yeah, and that's something I've experienced too. I can remember certain, and they say I do believe it's been kind of studied a little bit that the sense of smell is one of the most nostalgic. You can really, and I do. I mean, you can tell that when somebody's cooking something in it. And I can remember this certain hairspray that my mom would wear, and that was a long time ago, and it will immediately bring that thought back to my mind. But now of course you're open to talking about anything, and you brought it up. You had your son very young.
Yep.
Yeah. And that was based on some issues you had with family. If you want to get into that a little, I think it kind of maybe, because the question I would have is, how does that affect you? Because we talked about how being a foster child affected your need to want to foster others, and maybe this kind of might help us with some of your therapy issues. Reason you wanted to do what you're doing now.
Absolutely. So long story short, I was raised by my aunt and uncle from the time I was 4 until I was 12. Well, my aunt had me at 1, but then she got married to my uncle when I was 4. And so I had been with them until I was 12. Over the years, my uncle had been raping me, and I got pregnant at 11 and gave birth at 12 to my son, who's now 19. And I chose to keep him, even though he was a child from rape. I did choose to keep him. And that has very much impacted the person that I am today. It would be crazy to not assume or to think that it did. But it played a very big factor into why I wanted to be a therapist. Because I had a phenomenal therapist. When I got put in foster care, that was one of the mandatory rules, was that I had to go see a sexual abuse trauma therapist. She was phenomenal, and I worked with her from the time I was 12. Right before I was still pregnant, actually. I was about to give birth when I first started seeing her, up until I turned 18. Um, but the things that we worked on in therapy and the things that she helped me with, and just having somebody that understood and was validating, and um, as I navigated middle school and high school, dealing with that trauma that directly impacted my views of the world. And that's why I remember telling her one day, I was like, I'm going to be you when I grow up. I'm going to be a therapist. And I don't know if she took me serious then, like, oh, kids say they want to be like you all the time, but I was very serious. And so that directly impacted why I wanted to be a therapist, because I wanted to help other people the same way she helped me. And I'm a big advocate for therapy, even if you're like, oh, I'm not buying into all these different modalities. We got DBT, we got CBT, we got TFCBT, like we got, it's kind of the same thing, but, yeah, like there's so many different modalities, but I'm like, even if you take all the modalities off the table and the only thing we say is we're doing talk therapy, that's just me and you talking. A lot of people don't have somebody to talk to. A lot of people don't have somebody that wants to listen. Right. And so that alone can make the world of difference. And I think that's a big factor into it as well. But then, having a kid at 12 because of rape, that's a lot. And I mean, I took that on head on, because in my mind at the time, my thought was my family wasn't willing to protect me. A lot of them knew about the abuse that was going on, but back in the day, you know what they said? We don't talk about it. Keep it in the family. Sweep it under the rug. We don't talk about it. Don't tell anyone. This is between us,
I
right?
remember pray about it.
Yep. Oh, pray about it. Yep. Heard that all the time. And so, and funny that you say that. My uncle was a preacher, the one that was raping me. So, pray about it, right? So it was a lot. but I still chose to keep my son and raise him, and I did the best that I can. And now he's 19 and he makes me very proud. And so looking back, I don't have any regrets, but I will to wrap up some of the things. And of course, if you have more questions, I don't mind to answer them. But I think looking back, one of the hardest things for me was empathy and sympathy, right?
Yeah,
I
I
know
could see that.
it's kind of random. People are like, "Oh, it wasn't raising the kid. It wasn't, But looking back, like I really struggled. We briefly talked about how Ballard County was really like going to school and making friends and all that, like how they were really welcoming and understanding of my situation and saying, "Hey, I'm in foster care." They were really supportive. But I really struggled internally with being able to empathize. And I say that because can you imagine going to school and sitting at a lunch table with other kids and they're complaining because their mom didn't buy them the hair dye they wanted, or their dad took their cell phone away, or they didn't get extra ice cream money, right? To them, those are big problems, right? Those are things that's bothering them that day, right? Mom didn't let me go spend the night at my friend's house. But for me, I've been up all night with a crying baby that I had because I was raped, right? For
Yeah,
me, I
right.
just got ripped away from my twin brother who I've never been separated from. For me, I haven't seen some of my family, my younger cousins who've never done anything to me. Like, I miss my cousins, right? Um, for me, I've been taken out of my African American culture. I've been taken away from that, and now I'm placed in a foster home with a white family, right? And even though I grew to love my family, it's a culture shock. The food's different, the environment's different. I mean, so sitting there hearing these classmates complain who've welcomed me, like, oh, I mean, I care about them, because they've welcomed me with open arms and they've been understanding. But at the same time, internally battling, trying to empathize with them and trying to relate to them and trying to show sympathy when they're actually having grief and things going on, like that's a hard place to be. And so I think for me, I knew it was a problem because for me, I knew that if I couldn't learn and practice empathy or sympathy, I was never going to be able to be a therapist. And I think that was scary to me because that's what I really wanted. And so I had to do a lot of soul searching. Why am I struggling to accept that other people have problems? And just because they have a problem, it doesn't take away from my problem, right? And so that is, and even I think as an adult, like I still have to check myself, right? I have to be very intentional about showing sympathy and empathy for others and practicing that every day when I go into work, checking myself at the door. And I don't mean to be long winded, but
No, that's what
honestly,
we're here for.
I
Yeah.
think that for me was one of the hardest things about all of it. And even with my son, um, I will say that, and I don't know if anybody's ever asked me or thought about it for real, but we talk a lot about postpartum, right? We talk a lot about sometimes moms don't just bond with their kid, right? And I look back and I'm like, I don't really think I bonded with him the way I should have. I think I was very much detached. Um, I was still in shock. I had literally weeks before gave birth, I had been ripped out of my foster home, separated from the only family I really knew, separated from my twin brother. Like I was being homeschooled. I had been isolated. I have social workers and I have investigators, and we're talking about trial and court. And oh, and by the way, here's a therapist. Like there was so much going on, and so I even struggled with being able to bond with my kid. And so over the years, I had to even practice empathy with him, right? Because I wanted to keep him, I wanted to raise him, and I chose that life. Social workers and my foster mom, everybody was like, oh, you should give him up for adoption. You shouldn't keep him. You've been through too much. Everybody would understand. But in my head, the only thing I could think of was no one protected me when I told them I was being abused. No one listened to me. And a lot of times people said, oh, she's just a child. She needs to stay in a child's place. Don't listen to her because she's a child. So she couldn't be abused. Right. And so because I was a child, my voice did not matter. And I wanted to make sure that my son didn't have that same experience. But how can I make sure he doesn't have that experience if I can't empathize with him? If I can't ever put myself in my kid's shoes and say, I do understand that the world is not a fair place, right? I do understand that things are happening to you and life's crazy and you're the son of a rapist. Like that's something else I had to think about because how do I'm dealing with my own trauma, but that has to impact him too, right? How do you go as a kid go explain to your classmates who, well, what's your dad like? Oh, well, my dad's in prison for raping my mom. Like that's why that empathy was so important. I had to be able to practice it with him and I had to be able to practice it with my classmates and I had to learn to practice it with everybody. And so just overall, I will say that learning to be able to empathize and sympathize with people was probably one of the hardest things and things that I continue to work on today.
I would say that's probably something not a lot of people would think about. Yeah. And I could see there being some kind of all maybe like you were talking about your classmates, a little bit of resentment there coming out, like, yeah.
It was so much bigger than even that. I think that's just the best example that I can give. But I mean, everyday life.
Yeah. And your son too. I could almost see there being, I don't know, and I don't want to put anything out there, but maybe a little bit of resentment is like, I could see maybe that coming in at some point. I mean, of course you love
Yeah,
him
I don't
and
know if I ever really resented him. I wouldn't say that, but I definitely think I struggled to bond with him early on. And I had to be really intentional. We have a really good relationship now, but I had to be really intentional. And I had to force myself into some really uncomfortable spots to get to that place where when I looked at him, I didn't just see his dad. When I looked at him, I wasn't, assuming, people talk about genetics. And I think that's another thing that's cool about my role now. People will come talk to me and they're like, well, how much of this schizophrenia or this, and this is genetics? And I'm like, some of it can be genetics, but we also have to pause, just because the kid is born from this person doesn't automatically mean just because their parents are a rapist or did this and this doesn't automatically mean that child is going to be that. We have to give people the opportunity to be who they want to be and be who they are. Like everybody's different. And I think that's the big thing. And I think that also is how I kind of worked on that empathy and sympathy. I had to realize that it's not a competition on who has it worse, right? It's not a competition on who has it the best. We're all just humans. We're all just navigating what we've been dealt to the best of our ability. And I think that's the key for me in trying to like be social and interact in the world. I just have to keep that in the forefront of my mind.
well, I will kind of attest to this, and I'm not just doing this because you come and help me do this podcast, but from what I've known of your son, he's a great guy. He's a good boy, and you've done a great job, and I'm sure you had a little help with that. And I cannot speak for him, but I would imagine, and I imagine later in life he'll even be more so. He'd be very proud of you.
Oh, Joe, we've had so many. I think him now being an adult, we've been able to have a lot of really hard conversations. I think it really started when he was like 17 and me realizing like he's about to go into the world, like we need to have some really hard conversations. But we've talked about all of this, to a lot of people, I think they thought, oh, what does he know? Like, how much did you tell him or whatever? And I just like to tell people when he was young, I kept it age appropriate. I told him what he could handle, but I never lied. I was always very honest with him. Like, this is what it is. Am I ever going to see my dad? No, I'm sorry. He's in prison. Why is he in prison? Well, he hurt mommy. Like, I always made sure that it was age appropriate. As he got older, we were able to have those hard conversations. And, I even gave him my blessing. Like if he ever, if you ever wanted to reach out or he reaches out to you or any form of that, like don't base your decision on what I want. Don't think that I'm going to love you less because you want to ask him questions or. And so I think that's the best part about our relationship is that we have been able to be vulnerable with one another and have those open conversations.
Yeah, I can imagine there's going to be, I think that in some people, in my own experience, that there would be like, I got two questions. All I need is two questions answered, and then I'm done. I could see that going back if I could go back and talk to people in my life. Um, but as far as what you've done, so like I said, I've trained massive people, fighters that and I have seen some crazy things in my life, and I've seen some people overcome some things. But I will say this without a doubt, you're probably one of the most bravest people I've known. Just, well, I mean, at that age, being able to deal with that, and I know you had several different, it was a journey, and I'm sure there were times you're like, oh, I'd rather not. I get that, but to be able to do what you've done is very brave, and then to be able to come out and talk about it. and then what it's led you to do. So I hope that you're fulfilled with what you're doing based on that, because and I think that's an actual lucky thing that you got. And I know that may seem weird because you're just talking about people being, but I think that you are fortunate to be able to do what you do and almost fight that demon. You know what I'm saying? That demon that was there, and yeah, I think that's awesome that you get to do that.
Yeah. I think I definitely see the world from a different perspective that not a lot of people are able to do, right? One thing that me and my friends we joke about is no one wants to go to a parenting class with someone who's never had children. Like we've seen that, we laugh, we're like, what is this person up here trying to tell us? They've never even experienced this, right? And so that's the same concept that I think I apply to most of my life, right? I'm a therapist that's lived a life, who's been through trauma, who's experienced things, right? I'm not going to obviously there's scientific things and other aspects that goes into being a therapist, right? And there's other parts of it too, but that human aspect of it, being able to be vulnerable and being able to validate people in their pain and their grief and their trauma, like that's something that you can't get from AI. And I'll make that joke because AI is getting popular, right? And people are using that for therapy. But having somebody that's lived it, right? And I think that's the same thing with anything, right?
Yeah. Well, I commend you, doing what you're doing. It's hard to do. I can imagine it's hard. And to talk about it is freeing to other people, that they know. And here's something that I want to say, and this is, I'm going to try to do this straightforward. I deal with things with humor. So all the time. And I try to as much as I can. And this is something that I've never publicly talked about. Yeah, I did talk. I did have one session with a therapist, and I'm telling this therapist my story, and it's a lot. It's a lot. Everybody has a lot, though, And I always tell myself, I'm just kind of the same. I'm like, don't quit feeling sorry for yourself, But at the same time, I can remember telling my story, and I'm looking down, and I'm getting into the story, and I look up, and my therapist is crying. I'm like, damn.
Yeah.
It's so bad I'd make my therapist cry. And then as a young man in my position, in my generation, you just don't talk about stuff. You just deal with it. Just go on with your life. But then later I realized that 1 in 3 children, it seems like that was the stat I seen at one time. 1 in 3 children experience some kind of sexual some kind of sexual assault in some way, in some different ways. And going back to when I was very young, and my mom, like I said, she was a drug addict, and it's a love-hate thing. I have a tattoo that says, if I never see you again, so what, love, mom? So it's a love-hate thing. And when my mom died, it was really hard on me because, she was gone for years at a time. But she would do anything for drugs, anything. And I had an uncle that she would drop me off at, and she would go spend the whole day out. And, I think it would be a coward of me to sit here and let you do and tell that story and then do so much on behalf of others that have suffered from that, for me not to tell that, and tell it has been a hard journey. And then, this happened this wasn't an isolated incident. This happened quite a bit. And for a young, and I also seen this on a podcast that they were talking about young men won't because of an embarrassment, like it was their fault or whatever. And I would say right now there is probably 5 people in the world that would know about this that I've talked to about. And when I talk to them about it, one of my best friends, we joke about it, and that's the only way we can do it. I mean, that's Gen X, it's like, oh, well, we're going over here. Well, at least you ain't going to your uncle's house. That's what we do. That's how we talk about it. That's the only way we can talk about it. But it's affected my entire life. My relationships, probably more than anything, it affected my relationships and how and of course, then at the same time, moving into a family. And I'm not trying to turn this into a therapy session.
This is
but
great.
I'm just telling this story real quick. Moving with my family that only seen my mom. They called me by her name when I lived with my dad's family, and of course, they all hated her. So it was felt very isolated and individual. I can remember thinking at some point as a young child, and I know this is a common thing, but that the devil had made all these people around me robots, and I'd always try to sneak in the room to see them taking their mask off, and because I was and it affected my relationships with dating and marriage, and it also with friendship. It was really hard to connect closely with friends. I've had people say, "Oh, Joe, yeah, we're best friends." I'm like,
We are.
I didn't know that.
Right?
Well, hey, I got a best friend. Didn't
Yeah.
even know it. So it's been extremely hard connecting, and it's also made me completely scared for my children, just to try to protect them from that. And so again, I want to thank you for being the person you're doing, and it's a strong thing. And I don't think that maybe people wouldn't recognize that maybe hadn't experienced it. To be like, okay, yeah, it happened, and shake it off. It's over. Yeah, it never goes away. It's hardwired into your system. So, yeah, that's a big move for me. So, and that's why it's very important to me. I've wanted to take some time and do some volunteer work, for children going through different things. And I can, for me, when I see children that have been in issues, to me, it just, the thing that I hate the most is the confusion. Why? For that child at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or any age, why, it's like in your mind, you're like, what's going on? Why is this happening? What is this? And then, trying to figure out what's going on.
I think that's the importance of a therapist too, though, right? Is being able to have somebody that you can go word vomit to. You can just go say all these things and ask the questions, and they can kind of help you piece these things together, right? Because a lot of times our families won't. Like I said, I had a family that was like, sweep it under the rug, don't talk about it, don't communicate it. And so that's the importance of why that mental health aspect is just important. If we take all the modalities off the table and we just talk about talk therapy, just having that person that can help you, that's unbiased, because I think that's also important, right? If you talk to your aunt or your uncle and they're connected to the person that's abusing you, they have a bias, right? And so I think having that third party who's outside of the picture who can help you kind of navigate your own emotions, I think that's crucial. I just want to say thank you for sharing your story with me, because I think that's one of the things that's most important to me in my journey, is because I was always told to sweep it under the rug. Don't talk about it. He's a preacher. You'll ruin your family's lifestyle. You'll ruin your family. Da 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 da. All these people were giving me reasons on why I shouldn't talk, why I shouldn't speak up, or disowning me because I did speak up, or so and so did speak up, right? And so, and even after I had Elvira, a lot of people who were telling me that I shouldn't keep him, part of that was because, well, you don't want him to know, like he shouldn't know. He shouldn't know that his father's a rapist. Like, just let him be adopted. He shouldn't know that his mom's been through X, Y, and Z. And I think for me, from a young age, I wanted to just break that. All this not talking about things, all this sweeping things under the rug, pretending that everything's okay. Let's not do that. Like, how about we don't, and we just be honest. We just be vulnerable. Say it out loud. This is what it is. It hurt me. It wasn't my fault. This is how I'm dealing with it, right? This is what I still need help with, right? And I think the more people start to talk about the hard things, it'll be easier. It's easier for men to cry and to be vulnerable when they open up and when they get used to that. It's easier for people who have been through sexual trauma to be outspoken when other people are doing it, right? So I hope that by me sharing my journey and the things that I've been through, that other people do start to share their story, because it's not your fault. And I think part of the trauma and the pain is that people just kind of lock it away and hold it in. And then it builds and it builds and it builds. And then they start to resent people and they shut people out, or they isolate, because part of you is hidden. All those years, you've connected with hundreds of thousands of people probably. But no, most of them have never gotten to know the real Joe, because you've only shown them a part of who you are, right? And so imagine if you could walk out that door and be your authentic, vulnerable self, and you don't have to constantly keep a part of who you are secret, right? That's always been in the back of my mind. How do I withhold a secret? How do I not tell the world that I have a child based on rape? How do I not tell people that my mom's a drug addict. How do I not tell people? People are like, oh, you shouldn't share that. You shouldn't tell that. No, I need to. I need to get it out. Why should I hold this in and hurt?
Yeah, and I agree with you. And even on another note, there, by doing that, by staying silent, nothing changes.
Mm-mm. You know what you're doing? You're protecting the
You
person
are
that abused you.
absolutely,
They're protected.
and
Their image is protected, but you're hurting.
exactly, and that's why I said, and this may be a kind of a bad way to look at it. That's why I say, talking with you made me feel a coward. It's like, and I know that may not be the fact, and I don't want anyone to feel that way that doesn't feel like talking about something like this at all. That's not where I'm going. But for me, that is something I'm like, you are making a statement based on some very hurtful things, so that, and not only in part to help yourself, but also to try to make sure this doesn't happen again. It is a very, very selfish thing that these people are doing. And I'm not saying even this is a stretch. I don't want to be talking the wrong way here, but yeah, there's some problems there. These people don't, there's an issue that they're struggling with. The selfish part of it is not being able to resist or get help with that issue, I think. And of course, that older generation would never have done that. So I think it's time that people, start talking and start making things better. Because if it's 1 in 3, there should be none. So it's a horrible thing, and we need to straighten that out. And that's why I told you when you came, this is really important to me. So I know we've been here a while, and I can tell you're getting uncomfortable a little.
No,
but
it's fine.
with, and we had a little pause there. So I'll start to wrap it up. But I want to wrap it up on a little lighter note.
Okay.
You're awesome. You're awesome.
Thank you.
And don't let no one ever tell you differently. I love what you do. I wish that I had the opportunity more now to do that. When you get further in life, it's harder to break away. I keep telling myself, okay, if I can just get this here, and then I can take the time. But right now, life has got a hold of me. So, but I do appreciate that. So some of the the normal podcast questions that you want that are asking. I'm trying to look through my notes here. One of those are, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, I hate this question. Listen.
Give me 2 then.
Ooh, I don't even know.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know how to answer it.
Yeah,
I love all movies.
know. I don't know.
I hate the fact that the movies are starting to lose their depth. I just said this the other day. I said, I think movies, and I know it was a development from storytelling to books to blah, but I think movies was one of the greatest inventions of man. I really do.
Yeah.
Because a good movie draws you in,
Yep.
and you get to experience. Same thing that I want to do with this podcast. I want people to experience different things, and yeah, so that is that's a tough question.
Joe, I'm an indecisive person, right? When people ask me what my favorite color is, I'm like red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. I got to pick one. Okay, blue. So that's how I feel about movies. I've seen so many movies, honestly. If you ask me types of genres and that kind of thing, I may have been able to help you a little bit more. But honestly, I don't know about my favorite movie.
Music, style of music.
Listen,
love it all.
Yeah. So I feel like this kind of ties back into a more serious thing. But for real, I think I'm just a weird person, Joe. Okay?
I agree with that. I've known you a while.
I am, and I own that. And part of the reason why I'm like I don't have a favorite anything really is because except for favorite food, buffalo mac and cheese. How you doing?
All right, I've never tried that.
It's so good. It's so good. It's yours too. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, so good. But what I will say is, as part of that is, I think it goes back to that trauma piece, right? I think because of a lot of the trauma that I've been through in my life, it's hard to have a favorite of anything. I'm an indecisive person. I force myself to make decisions. But I think the other aspect of that is because I grew up in a, African American culture, then I was put into a white culture. I think it helps me just kind of have a perfect blend of all kinds of things. I love different movies. I can be jamming in the car to country music and then switch it to gospel music and switch it to rap music. And, I can try a variety of food. I say I'll try almost anything once. Right. And the same thing applies to TV shows and movies. Like, I know you have those questions, but I really.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's the perfect answer, because that truly is you come from a diverse group of people.
It's so hard to put myself in a box because I'm just so used to.
Great answer. Really is good answer on that. So what do you enjoy doing besides when you're not working, when you're not with kids? It's just, Brianna, time?
I'm very friend oriented. I love catching up with friends. I love traveling. I like going for walks and hiking. I really do love music. I listen to all kinds of different music based on what's going on in my life at that time. I love roller coasters and like waterfalls. So yeah, I just really like to explore.
Where's your one of your favorite places you've been?
Well,
And again, that could be
ooh,
hard to say.
I don't know. That is kind of hard. I went to Italy a little bit ago. The food wasn't as great as they said it was going to be, you know.
Yeah. So Tristan, yeah,
Yeah,
Tristan,
food
you just broke Tristan's heart.
the food was not great,
Yeah.
but the overall experience and the architecture was beautiful, and I love looking at architecture and that kind of thing. So honestly, that's probably the coolest place that I've been, and I also like to cruise. So,
Yeah, me
but
too.
yeah.
I like that.
Hmm.
What do you think about the state of the world? Just a brief answer.
Ooh, the state of the world. Ooh, the world's crazy right now.
Very much.
And I try to keep up with it just enough to know what's going on, but I also try not to dwell on it. And so I think what's going to happen is going to happen. I'm going to do my part to contribute to the world and society the best that I can. And the rest, it is what it is.
Yeah, there's hope.
Yeah.
There's always hope.
Always hope.
Yeah. Okay, this is pretty much a big one. What is the meaning of life for you?
Ooh, the meaning of life. Ooh, I think it goes back into I'm a friend oriented person. I think for me, I am a believer of Jesus Christ, and I do believe that we're put on this earth to contribute to each other, to connect with each other, to give back to each other, to feed off of each other. And so I think every day that I wake up, it's kind of like, okay, what can I do to make the world a better place? But in my world as well, right? I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, how can I be this famous person and, you know,
Influence everyone.
influence everyone? And I'm like, I'm just trying to make a difference here with the people that I'm involved in. If I reach that level, great, great. I don't know about that because I don't know if I can not have privacy like these famous people. But I mean, if it reached that level, great. But really, I need to impact the people in my current environment. Like I want to be able to, you know, I want my friends to know they can count on me. You know.
It falls back for me. It's connection. We all want to connect and make, and you want I think it's a thing in us that wants to leave something, and that connection is our way of being immortal, connecting.
And I think the big thing for me is intentionality. I think that's been my word for this year. I'm not really big into New Year's resolutions or anything, but this year, the number one thing that I can consistently think about is, am I being intentional with my life? Right. So you asked me, like, that question, and it's like, am I being intentional in my interactions with my friends? Am I being intentional at work? Am I being intentional with my own mental health and physical health, right? Am I being intentional in my interactions with my kids? I have 6 children. Am I setting aside quality time for each of them? You know, they deserve one on one time as well. So, really, I think our lives are meant to be lived intentionally. And that's just my goal.
I think that's an awesome way to look at it. And what I'm going to do is, some people's life is, what's the meaning of life? Well, it's to be lived. I think that my new catchphrase is going to be to live life intentionally. To live intentionally. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Are you happy?
Working on it every day. Yeah. Some days I wake up and I'm like, I got this. And some days I'm like, I could be doing more. Um, and I mean, no one's happy all the time. So, like, you didn't ask that as a trick question, but I mean, that's the reality. Some days I'm happy and on cloud 10, and some days I'm like still trying to figure it out. I don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, you've been a great podcast guest, and I knew
Yeah.
you would be. And I was so excited to do this one because you're such an awesome person. And I know I maybe just complimenting you more than you may want, but you deserve it. You're strong, powerful person. As one of my close friends, even though we're friends through my wife, and she's like, she's like, we're doing this podcast, she's like, that's my friend. I said, well,
Yeah.
not anymore, or at least for this
I
hour,
still
she's
love her.
no.
Yeah.
My wife's awesome. She is really, truly an awesome person. So I want to put that out there because I don't say that enough about her, and she should know that. And I know that she's awesome because she's got awesome friends.
Thank you.
And
She is amazing. I've known her since middle school,
yeah,
and she's never
she's
missed
a
a beat.
quirk. I mean, you talk
Yep.
about being a weirdo. Yeah, but I love her to death. She's changed my life,
Yep.
and she's been there through some really hard times and helped me through it. So amazing. And she's going to be on the podcast soon, though, because we're going to talk about her streaming, because that's something it took me a while to get used to. And I will say this on closing, that was a wake up call for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, go ahead. And then the first guy that says, oh, you got pretty eyes. I'm like, wait a minute.
Talking to my wife.
My generation, I didn't have, it's like time to fight. But so it was a really hard 3 or 4 weeks.
Rules are different online.
I could have used a therapist during that time. Yeah, it was tough on me. I was not prepared. So again, thanks again for taking the time. You're coming down from Bowling Green and spending this hour with me in an uncomfortable chair. But you were awesome, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate the opportunity that I got to share something as well that's been there for, I'm not going to tell you my age, but it's been there for a long time.
I know, Joe.
Yeah, I know. We'll bleep that out if you say it.
I'm not.
But yeah, and I hope that people keep talking about it. I think that's one of the great things about the new generations, is they will open up. They're, and I think that's important. The constructs that we put in place in the 50s were constructs. They were not necessarily the right way or the wrong way. Just the same as what I grew up with and you did. These were ideas put in place by other people, and sometimes they need to be broken down and rebuilt.
Yep, we learn as we go.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming down, and I hope things keep going well for you. And I'm excited. Maybe we'll do this again later, because there are a couple of questions that I still have out there, now that we knocked out a lot of these, and maybe we'll have a little bit more time for you to think about that favorite movie.
Ooh,
yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yada, yada, yada. I never heard from him again.